Our next session will be the topic of the next session is building a regional business in Southeast Asia. It is moderated by Dina Karakash. She's a portfolio manager at IDF VC. And our speaker is Илья Кравцов. He's CEO and founder at Pouchnation. So welcome on stage. Dina, I can see you, but yes, and I can see Ilya. Ilya, nice to see you. So,
hey, how are you?
I'm fine. Hope you're doing well as well. Let's start.
Sure. So I'm glad to welcome Ilya to our online stage. Hello, Ilya. And also I'm glad to welcome the audience who have found the time to join us. Let me first briefly introduce the speaker. Илья Кравцов is a professional with more than 13 years of experience in mobile and internet space, having taken various roles in CMC, management consulting, telecoms, and IT startups. Currently, Илья is leading Pouchnation, Singapore-based tech company specialized in crowd management, technologies, IoT, contactless payments, and behavioral analytics. Pouchnation has successfully attracted capital from well-known regional players. The last Series B round was closed by the regional unicorn company called Traveloka, together with one of the key media players, Speech Ventures. Yeah, could you please share with us your experience and how have you fared in Singapore?
Hi guys, good to connect with everybody. Yeah, sure. So a little bit about myself. So I was born in Moscow, but I grew up in Italy, and I started actually my career in management consulting. So I worked in, my first job was out of South Africa, where I spent a couple of years advising telecom operators there. And then my consulting firm opened an office in Singapore, and that was back in 2010. And they asked me to relocate to Singapore to help to develop the business there. And this is where I first ended up in Asia. I never thought I would, stay here for 10 years, but, here I am after 10 years. So I came here 2010, basically worked for my consulting company, was originally based in Singapore. And then in 2012, I resigned from my corporate job and I started my first startup. So I've been doing startups in Southeast Asia since 2012. Now I'm at my second/third startup. So I've seen the whole ecosystem growing and had the privilege to build a regional business. My current company, as Dina said, we are in 6 countries. So happy to be here and happy to answer any of your questions and give some insights on the region.
Great, thank you. So having an experience of living and working in Europe and the US, why have you decided to stay in Southeast Asia and do business in this market?
Well, I think, to be honest, Southeast Asia, when I came here, the feeling was that, Southeast Asia was, 10 years behind China, probably 5 years, 6 years behind India. But the whole tech boom was about to start, right? So when I came to Indonesia 2012, imagine Indonesia is 280 million people. And, at that time, there was no unicorns, no venture capital funds, nothing like that. And but the trends were all showing that this country is going to boom, that the consumers are willing to adopt technology very fast, and there's a lot of pockets of opportunity, which it's still the case. But obviously at that time when everything was starting, so I said I cannot miss that crazy journey, and I have to be involved from the beginning, and that's why I decided to stay.
Okay, fair enough. So why have you decided to start Pouchnation back in 2016, right? And what has served as a driver for you?
So just to give you a bit of overview of what my company does. So we're in a fintech space. So we developed a closed loop payment system using NFC and RFID wristbands, right? So originally it looks something like that. It's like a wristband with a chip inside. And that chip allows us to do transactions, in particular offline transactions. So I think 5-6 years ago, fintech was really developing very fast, and I think Irina mentioned about it before and how the whole e-wallet started to appear. So obviously we wanted to play in that space. However, obviously there is some constraints if you want to run an e-wallet in Southeast Asia, because you need to apply for a license, and that process is very expensive and also might take a lot of time. So we decided to go another route. So if you look at the payment ecosystem, there's always an open loop payment system that is highly regulated and usually serves, day-to-day clients in retail environment. And there's a closed loop payment ecosystem, right? So any closed loop systems that can work, like for example, Starbucks card is one of those examples, right? Where you can accumulate loyalty points and pay with it without necessarily being exposed to an open loop system. So we used NFC to develop that closed loop payment system. And our first initial focus was on large scale events, because it was a very easy low hanging fruit. Where, in particular festivals, music events and so on, where people would do transactions, but they needed a solution that could work offline and that could give them, the benefits of a quick transaction. And that's where we deployed our technology first.
Okay, I see. So you actually have 6 markets, right? With different cultures, client behaviors, payment methods, and so on. What has been your scaling strategies, and how have you entered each new market, if you can still remember that?
Sure. I mean, I think just to be very honest, and I'm sure there's a lot of entrepreneurs or listening to this conference and people that are, willing to launch their business in Southeast Asia. I think one advice I want to give everybody is that you don't necessarily always need to go regional. Right? It really depends on the sector where you operate, right? So some businesses can be very localized. So there's a lot of great companies built outside Indonesia, and Indonesia by itself is a huge market. Obviously, in our case, we're more focusing on events at the beginning, right? And events by definition is a very regional business, because you have artists coming to do regional tours and so on. So we decided to go that regional approach, which for us was very significant. And I think that was an interesting journey, because it allowed me to really get to know all the different cultures in Southeast Asia, right? And all countries are fairly different. Obviously, I think the main thing, what you need to do at the beginning is to really be present. And at that time, for me, it meant to do 100 flights a year. I was doing on average 100, 120 flights a year. So every 2-3 days, I was in a different country, meeting people, building the network. And this is also what Irina mentioned before in her talk. Asia is a lot about trust, is a lot about knowing people and building relationships. So now we're building relationships over Zoom, but back in the days it was really flying and meeting people in person. And in Southeast Asia is fairly easy to do. Used to be fairly easy to do, is 1 hour flight, and you can be anywhere, right? So that's how we started, and we started building a regional team. So I selected 1 country manager per country. And then step by step tried to build a business across the Asia.
This sounds like a lot of traveling, and so I would switch to the challenges you have faced at times. So what have been the challenges during your scaling? And maybe it's entering the market, hiring a management team, an international team, fundraising, or receiving payments, or probably something else I might not even think about. Could you guide us through them?
Look, I mean, in terms of challenges, I think what I want to mention is that there are multiple challenges all the time in running a startup, right? So obviously, whether you run in one country, whether you run in multiple countries, I think the advantage that I had is that I have a fairly international background. As I said, I was born in Russia, raised in Italy, and then lived in many different countries. So that kind of prepared me from since I was a kid to be ready to kind of in every new environment to start building your network fairly quick, right? I can see that many other founders, also local founders, whether it's Indonesian founders or Thai founders, have a bit more, more challenges in doing so, because they're used in just living in one country and being successful in their markets. But then when they go abroad, it's a whole different game. So I think what is important is obviously, understand the the differences between the countries here, between the cultures, and really build and focus on your network, right? And that's what I was doing. And Obviously, the challenge is that, you know, I would say there's no major challenges regarding like language barriers or all that. I mean, I think in business environment, everybody speaks English, and that is okay. But then, of course, like in terms of incorporating companies, in terms of hiring, it's a whole different game, right? We now have 6 entities in all the markets in Southeast Asia, and obviously that took us 5 years. The second thing is like, you know, hiring processes and or firing people, because if you run a startup, you don't always hire, but you fire as well. That's another that's another challenge, because you know, for example, in Thailand, it's very hard to fire people. You need to give 6 months severance plus 3 months notice. So obviously that I didn't know at that time where when I started building the office there, but I'm very well now. So I think there's a lot of you know, things that you need to learn along the way. And the best thing to do that is to meet people that have gone through the process, right? Like, you know, I'm sharing a lot with other startups and that, you know, my mistakes, and I've done them a lot. So that, you know, if you can identify a mentor in every market that can help you out, then you will have a much smoother ride than I did.
Okay. So if you have a chance to build your startup from scratch, what would you do differently? You already mentioned some points, but probably there might be something else.
Look, I think what is important, and that's what I realized. So I'm also mentoring startups as part of Plug and Play program. And, you know, I'm now at batch 6, I think. So I've been doing that for past 5 years. So I've seen like more than a couple of hundred startups. And I think what you realize is that there's certain models that work well and certain models that don't work well. And there's certain patterns, right? So when you start a startup, you have basically, you're not necessarily following one of those patterns. And this is, and this can, you know, basically delay your time to success, right? And the way I look at startups is always, you know, where you are now and where you want to be when you are successful, and how long is that time frame, right? So what I'm trying to always say, you know, to first-time founders or people who come to Southeast Asia, is that you need to shorten that time frame as much as possible. Is the best way to shorten that is to avoid some unconventional models, or kind of some models that before have not been necessarily proven, or might be difficult to execute, right? And this is what probably we kind of embarked a little bit at ourselves. So we've been, you know, working with events, which we realized that it was a great business, but it was also not as scalable as we wanted it to be, right? So now indeed we opened a second vertical, which is more deploying our technology for venues and permanent installations, which is more of a SaaS business model, right? And this is where, you know, you start connecting the dots. Okay, so SaaS works, right? It's scalable. You can, you know, scale fairly quickly across the markets. Other models, you need to really go heavy on people and your costs go up. So what I really advise is, before you really launch a business, make sure that you kind of relate to one of the models that work. And then the second thing that I really would like to mention also is the purchasing power. So doing a business in US or Europe is very different compared to doing it in Southeast Asia. Southeast Asia, the purchasing power is still very low. And even though you can become market leader, but it doesn't mean that you're going to be making millions in revenues, right? Because a lot of markets that you can be leader in are still fairly small and are still in the early stages. So that's something else that I would like to mention, that the monetization part is still very hard. It's easy to get a lot of traction and a lot of customers because you're starting from a blank sheet, but to really get your numbers from revenue up, it's a lot more challenging.
Yeah, thank you for touching this topic in terms of purchasing power, because everyone loves to talk about the number of people right now, but you should also consider that the middle class is still growing. And of course, it's growing with the high pace, but still it is not enough to have the high checks, I mean, at the same level as in Europe or the US. So I would love to talk about COVID and fundraising. I know that you raised a Series B investment in 2019, just before COVID happened. Many companies have been struggling to find a way to survive. Meanwhile, you found a new market opportunity, which turned into a new product, right? Based on the technologies of Pouchnation, if I'm not mistaken. Could you please tell us, how have you gone through the crisis with your core business? And which solution have you introduced to the market? during the COVID in 2020?
Yeah, 100%. So obviously we are, we've been working with a lot of, large scale events like festivals, music, sport events of the likes of Formula One and so on. And we've been, market leader in that, and as well as in permanent installations before COVID. Obviously, when COVID hit back last year in February, March, we suddenly saw all our events being canceled. And it was I remember in Thailand it was Songkran, which is like that time of the year where they celebrate and they have all these water wars on the streets and massive festivals, and suddenly everything is canceled because of COVID. So obviously it was a very challenging time because we were a quite sizable organization. I had close to 100 full-time employees. And when your revenue start dropping close to zero because everything is shut down, then as an entrepreneur you really need to make some quick changes and very quick, right? Because you don't have a lot of luxury of time because your burn starts to go through the roof. And what we did is, obviously our core expertise as a company was in crowd control, in contactless payment, in wearable, and we decided that, look, now with COVID, anywhere you go, there is crowd control, right? You go to a restaurant, people are checking your temperature and checking, your data. You need to leave your details. You go to the cinema, the same, right? So I had a chat with an investor, and he's like saying, look, man, your market size is like, grew exponentially, because before you were just like doing crowd control for events and venues, and now you're doing it anywhere you go, right? So you should do something about it. Right. And this is where we went back to the drawing board and we developed a new product, which is called Pouch Pass. It's basically a wearable device that looks like this with a temperature sensor. So if you put it on, it can measure your body temperature continuously, as well as it has a Bluetooth a tracker inside. So it can do contact tracing. Basically can tell you if you've been in contact with any other people. So we developed this device, and it was a major success because a lot of organizations, governments, etc., they started buying those devices to monitor their crowds and see if there's anybody with high temperature or if there's anybody who falls sick. And we managed to fairly quickly pivot into that direction and launch a subsidiary that became very successful in a short amount of time. And this is what allowed us to survive the pandemic. Now this year, things are starting to reopen again slowly, and we see the traditional business coming back. But that was a quick solution that we tried to implement and using our core skills. So again, no matter how big and successful you can be, you always need to be humble to go back to zero and restart. And I think that's the lesson for each entrepreneur that is probably in this room.
Yeah, you have a really agile and creative team. Like not everyone could think about using the technology in this field, which is booming. So I would love to continue the topic about the investment. I know you have a really strong pipeline of local investors and also strategic investors as well. What's the secret sauce?
Look, the secret sauce is, I would say it takes time, right? Like, investors is like, courting, it's like a court, there's a courting phase, there's, deal making phase and so on, right? So I think what I realized is that it's about building relationships. And sometimes, if, some investor tells it's it's not a big deal, but you should just keep the relationship, and sooner or later they will say yes, right? It's not always that they don't like you. It's maybe they want to see some something prove the model, and they will come back to you and invest. So I think what I've seen, at least from my experience, and we have a long list of shareholders, including institutional investors, venture capitalists, strategic investors like unicorns and so on. And I think, what I realized that, again, with some of them I've been talking to, a couple of months, and some of them have been talking for years and before they invested, right? And this is what I encourage everybody to do, right? Build that relationship, update people with how you're progressing, with what you're doing, what's your thought process behind. And obviously, if you're building a B2B business, strategic investors can add a lot of value. So there it's also not about showing just your financial returns, but showing how you can add value to somebody else, right? And that always gives an extra incentive for an investor to invest, because they will see, look, I have a financial return, but I also can get value from this guy. So I have I'm double happy. And that's what we try to do is at a certain point, we try to build our strategy around attracting strategic investors and making them invest in us. And on the other hand, collaborate with them and increase our presence in the markets. So I don't think there's, a silver bullet, but it's about persistence. It's about, relationships. It's about, driving your business and, being laser focused. So that's kind of a few things I can recommend.
Okay, talking about the final goal, what could be a success story for Pouchnation and yourself?
Well, I mean, again, look, it depends, right? So it depends on why you build a company, right? And I think this goes back to this fundamental question, right? Do you build a company because you want to sell it and you want to be rich? Do you build a company because you feel that there is a problem that you really want to solve? Right, and that's why you're building the company. You build a company because you just want to leave a mark and do something, regarding innovation and innovate. So I think everybody has its own purpose, and I think where it can be for us, I still don't know. I think we're still in phases where we're growing, we're building the business, and we want to do more. The region is still early days, guys, right? So even though it's 10 years. Into like the startup ecosystem, I think there's a lot of people are like celebrating the 10 years of Southeast Asia startup community. In reality, it's the first 10 years, right? So there's another 10, 20 years to go, and there's so many things that needs to be done. Same in our case, right? I mean, we're just scratching the surface, and this is what I guess also attracts a lot of investors to the region, right? They go, they talk to these companies. And they see that the companies are doing well, but the market size is just still very big, and there's still a lot of things to do, right? So I believe we're on that journey to do more, to grow, and whether it's a buyout, strategic buyout, or whether it's an IPO, or whether it's going bust, we don't know, right? We just hope for the best, and the most important is to think about your customers and think that you can. Improve their situation and make their life easier, and that's what we focus. We focus on our clients, which we want them to now go back and start operating safe, post-COVID environment.
Okay, fair enough. It's kind of catching the wave. As you mentioned, you're also a mentor and advisor, so I assume you have seen many interesting trends in the market. Have you identified any which you could share with us?
Sorry, what?
Any trends? That could be business model, verticals, or something else.
Well, I can tell you what I see that is happening now and what is very sexy at the moment, right? So at the moment, I think there's a few verticals that a lot of things are happening. So one is InsurTech, right? So there's a lot of InsurTech players are coming to the market. And different models, right? Like in that sense, that there is a model of Policy Bazaar, what happened in India, right? Where you create a big amount of traffic online, and then you have a call center calling up people and selling them insurance. So that's one model. There's another model of micro insurance where you, partner up with a lot of e-commerces, and you insure like small sachet kind of packages, like either your travel or your small goods that you buy, right? So insurance and definitely is a big one, and there's different approaches. Nobody yet is a unicorn there, but I believe there will be one unicorn. So there's a lot of people fighting for it. So that's one definitely trend. Another one is a lot of obviously health startups emerged, and it's still early days for some, but some are on a good path to become a unicorn. One in particular that I've been working close with, in the early days as an advisor is called HaloDoc, and they are probably going to be the next unicorn in Indonesia. And they provide consultations, basically remote consultations with doctors, which is particularly relevant for Indonesia, where you have thousands of islands. So health tech, InsurTech, EduTech is also something that's been emerging. All right, and it's a lot of the level of education in this market is still very poor. And you know, and it's hard to, and especially with COVID, so there's a lot of startups emerging there. I mean, it's still a bit tricky how to monetize in that space. It's not that easy, but definitely it's another hot area. And then the last one I would say is a very particular, is what we call them. There's a lot of mom and pop shops. They call them warungs here in Indonesia. So there's a lot of startups who are trying to digitize those mom and pop shops and warungs, right? And there are literally millions of those, right? So their startups are raising tens of millions to, you know, deploy some accounting apps to them, or, you know, any type of, you know, digital technology to understand and get more data from that very informal sector, right? And this is very, very hot at the moment. You have startups like Buku-Kas or Buku Warung that have been raising like 20 million in 1 year just to digitize that specific space. So those are the few trends that I observe. And then we shall see. I think it's always evolves, and always new hot topics, you know, come into play.
Okay, thank you, Ilya. We have some questions from the audience. So Maxim is asking whether you have tried to apply for digital insurance or digital bank license in any country in Southeast Asia.
I haven't applied myself for digital insurance or digital bank license. I think on the bank license is more complicated. I think on the insurance, like to get a license to be a broker, is not that complicated. You know, there's a lot of brokerage, insurance brokers that you can, you know, just buy off the bat. So I know a lot of startups that do have that license. On the banking side, there's different categories of licenses, right? So you have the, you know, the e-wallet license, the e-money license. There's a lot of differences, and I think it's a lot more, you know, complicated there. But on the insurance side, I think it is regulated, but it's easier to get into the game.
Okay, thank you. There is also a comment that Alibaba is also aggressively entering the digitalization of moms and pops. So do you think there is a potential for disruption on that side?
Yeah, look, I think it's a massive segment. It's like similar what Gojek has done with all the informal sector of the drivers, right? That were, you know, before they were still there, right? They were giving a ride to people, and now they're all sitting on the Gojek platform. Similar what is happening with all these mom and pop stores. So it's a hot topic for many players, including like, you know, recently Microsoft invested $100 million in a startup called Bukalapak that has pioneered, you know, the digitization of the mom and pop stores called Mitra Bukalapak. And so there's a lot of players are looking at it, because the moment you start understanding how these mom and pop stores behave and how much money they make on a daily basis, you can upsell them a lot of services, right? It could be lending, it could be insurance, it could be many things. And that's what the end game is for many of those guys who are bigger guys who are entering the game.
Thank you. Yeah. So we are done with the questions and with the panel discussion. So thank you a lot for your time and for such a helpful insight. Mikhail?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us at this conference, and for such an interesting speech and such an interesting answers on the questions.